Welcome to the Fast Mode podcast series. I'm Tara Neil, and with me today is Dan Crawford, Strategy Manager at Cisco Networking. Cisco is a leading global vendor of networking solutions for the internet. Dan leads the strategy for data center, mobility, and IoT solutions at Cisco, driving the vision and innovations that are shaping the future of network services. He is responsible for defining and steering the long-term strategy for Cisco's data center, mobility, IoT, and carrier network portfolios, ensuring the company remains at the forefront of the rapidly evolving digital landscape. Dan joins us as part of our exclusive editorial segment on Gen AI for network management. Welcome, Dan. Great to have you on today's episode.
Thank you for having me, Tara. I'm excited to be talking about this.
Awesome. Okay, so let's dive right in. Beyond its typical use cases in customer service and marketing, what role can Gen AI play in network management?
Well, that is a fair question. I think something we're all wrestling with right now in the industry is where AI actually lives in general. We've progressed significantly from being able to interpret a lot of what's out there in the data and then turning that interpretation into actionable items. But when it comes to Gen AI right now, I think we have a real obligation to guard what the data inputs are and then even further safeguard what the data outputs would be. A lot of people, when you talk to them in a common, like I bring it to a dinner table conversation, you're not going to be getting into the deep details of models. You're not going to be talking about the OSI stack. In general, actually, in the industry, most people don't talk about the OSI stack when once you get out there into the real world. It's a very academic concept, but I think we should be revisiting something like that right now and reconsidering, does AI have a place in this conversation? And how do we build on top of that? Because a network is what powers AI, and there is no AI without the network. It's pretty simple that the data goes in, the bits and bytes produce what AI becomes. And for network management in particular, AI has the potential to redesign networks and iterate on those networks and optimize at a rate that we've, as humans, aren't capable of doing. But obviously, that optimization comes from the inputs we provide, the expertise and intelligence we delivered to it so it can begin thinking and establishing those parameters around it. But it's not just infrastructure layouts, network designs, and diagrams. It's the services that run on top of it, the outcomes that are expected from it, and ultimately the safeguarding measures for deploying it. And if we do it correctly, the network can self-optimize, self-heal, and even deliver services that we didn't expect would exist before. But we are a ways from that when it comes to our capabilities with AI today. There's a lot in place that needs to be put in place, I should say, to get there. And back to that OSI stack, like, where do you start? A lot of people have looked at those foundational layers of like physical layer and transport, and they're thinking, well, that doesn't need AI. But in reality, it does. Every bit of the network infrastructure has to have a role in that information or streaming telemetry from it, giving context to the data it supplies the models. And the models need to understand that context to understand the outcomes that are desired. And it seems simple as humans. You give something in instructions and it has an output. But it's not that simple because every bit of data you provide and every piece of there has more dimensions than we interpret when we have a conversation, particularly when we're looking at data in our traditional sense of binary zeros and ones. Is that the network management element of that needs to understand that it's not just a 0 or a 1 for what's going on, but that there's a domino effect. It's a very, very complicated, and even you can say 3D chess game it's playing. For every move it makes, it's going to impact a significant amount more resources down the line. So it's a massive amount of computing that needs to go into place to do that. But back to your network configuration and all that, we're doing stuff like that today, right now. It's detecting anomalies, which is, pretty straightforward, but it's taking those anomalies and then figuring out what do those anomalies mean in immediate context, but then broader context. It's, identifying inefficiencies and bottlenecks. Those pop up regularly. We all know that the access network is a bottleneck right now, and we want to find a way into greater distribution of the network without bottlenecking it, but also optimizing for sustainability and energy efficiencies and cost, and ultimately the more data in, more data out conversation without burdening the expense of doing so. And then there's the stuff that the bean counting elements. There's you can log analytics and basic troubleshooting, like where you can implement some service capabilities without needing to have that manual effort now. So it's early days, but they're progressing. There is some hesitance to it, though. It's obviously there are dangers to it as well. As much as the tool can help you, it can also hurt you.
Wow, amazing. I think you highlighted some of the core areas where we're going to benefit by using Gen AI. But in terms of the people in the network, I mean the network administrators, the engineers, and all that, what difference does it make to them? Between having the previous traditional AI capabilities and now Gen AI capabilities.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's a generational gap in some areas. Now, there are reasonable expectations for what Gen AI can do for you today, and there's also a need for human feedback. Is like reinforcement learning will help refine the models in which that we can use in the context of a network manager or an administrator, but you're not going to be replacing intelligence and expertise that a human can deliver or that decision making capacity today. I don't expect, and I'd maybe just do the draw, and like I'd say Generation X might be the drawing line where they probably don't use Gen AI to most extents. Like they are, well, they're experienced professionals in their careers. They know how to do things. They have the hands-on experience to do it. I would say maybe the millennial era generation is maybe that hybrid gap of some they're going to use it to some extent, but it's not as much as others. And then the earlier, younger generations are going to have a more native approach to it and more trust in it. But when it comes down to what it can do today, you're going to have that experienced, older in the career person giving the sage advice, saying this is real, this is not, because Gen AI is not infallible. And when you implement those tools, you need the human feedback loop for the fine tuning in order for them to be proper and accurate. I've yet to see a Gen AI model that doesn't make mistakes, that doesn't provide the perfect version of everything. Like I've used it for basic things, outlining and stenciling, just my own home network setups before, and it takes 50 plus iterations for it to actually work the way I want it to work. You can't just take it and run, but it does give you a good structure to begin with and work from. But you're never going to replace that expertise and experience that you have with the later in career professionals. They are absolutely invaluable in making this work today.
Well, that's the first time I'm hearing that, how the usage of Gen AI and, linking it to the different age cohorts that we have, and millennials and above, like you said, will be, more native users when it comes to Gen AI. Whereas, I don't know, it's difficult to admit, but that, at, say, my generation or so, that we are just going to be the people testing the models then, just to
Yeah, well,
validate.
yeah, and it's fair. I don't think people frame it that way as much. It's also there's a comedian named Ronnie Chen out there that does this great bit about if you wanted to experience torture as a younger generation, you do troubleshooting for your parents over the phone. And he was into this bit. Is like, if I wanted to go to Guantanamo Bay, that'd be a vacation compared to the amount of effort it takes to walk them through certain things on the IT side of just setting up their basic home computer. And to some extent, I think that it's true across the board in IT. Is that we're forever going to be the generation that gets stuck. And I say we, like I'm a millennial, just to put context into that, but we helped set up printers originally, and then we also are explaining that to the younger generation now what a printer is. It's like they don't necessarily print things out. It's like we're trapped in this IT bubble of needing to be the support system that bridges those generational gaps. And AI is probably going to frame that a lot for us in that regard. It's a great tool. When people call, say someone calls you up and they ask you, some factual question, like as if it was on Jeopardy. You don't know the answer, but you can easily Google that for them, and you want to be able to know the answer, so you Google it, and you're like, oh, here's the answer. You can almost guarantee, based on the person's age, this is one of those experiments that you could try with yourself too, based on that person's age, whether or not they'll be like, wow, how did you know that? Or, okay, thanks. Is that the instinct for a lot of us in the computer era, internet era age is, oh, we can Google that and we will get an answer. Now, whether that answer is right or not, and the responses on Google, that's, open to interpretation in many regards, but we'll have an answer because if we don't, we know that our next step is let's just openly ask the world on the internet about what this possibly means versus previous generations don't have that natural instinct. They don't think to troubleshoot by themselves first. They do that afterwards, after they get pointed in that direction, thinking that other people know better. And well, in our evolving generation of Gen AI is that, the data we have online and the data that AI has access to is that information, and it gives us that guiding next step. Now, obviously, that further down the line, we just kind of reversed it, and that professors in college and advisors and stuff like that are going to be like the arbiters of truth for us because they
Yep.
can sift out what the BS is and what the reality is, and really point you in the right direction if it becomes very convoluted. And that's obviously goes back to the human feedback loop: is that Gen AI and AI in general needs guidance still. We just have to find that balance of where that guidance lives and comes from.
Amazing. I think you just mentioned earlier some of the use cases for network management. Now, where do you see the greatest success? Which area in network management where you see the greatest success in the short term?
It's a good question. And it depends on how you're looking at it. So if you are insulated in network management and doing a lot of the plumbing, it's going to be in the designing aspect of it. But when we talk about AI, everyone's going to be looking for the business application of it, the revenue impact, the bottom line um, element. And right now, the short term is going to be service and support and being able to distribute that um, as much as a telco's network is distributed, and that's customer support at the moment. It's that, for better or worse, no one likes to be stuck with a chatbot that continues to say, "Hey, have you tried this? Have you tried that?"
Yep.
And walking through the troubleshoot says, when you're just trying to press either on your phone, jam that number zero in to get to a representative, or scream at the talking robot and saying, "Hey, I just want a representative," and to finally it gives you one. That level of improvement in those support bots and those chat platforms right now is just generationally making leaps in capabilities of doing so. Not only is it just a suggested remedy for what you're going through at home, but it's also the ability for it to engage with the backend system too. It's that when you were saying, "Hey, my connectivity is slow," or "My connectivity is doing X or Y or Z," if you prescribe it properly, the AI systems on their side is very capable of going back and figuring out steps for remediation without actually ever needing to engage a technician, which is really, really cool because you, in effect, you are outsourcing your troubleshooting and your service and support to a system that can automate that.
Oh, interesting.
And that doesn't fully replace things because you can't ask them to reset and restart a router without having a backup secondary connection. Otherwise, the bot's going to go, and you need the connection to be able to stay with it. But you can solve around that with the forms of stateful bots and AI systems that understand where a conversation ends and where it continues and how to pick that up. But a lot of people want to lean even further into agentic AI and figure out like what happens when AI gains agency? Can it proactively go about doing these things? And um, as bullish as I want to be on that, we're years from it. We're years from being able to trust a system that can do that. Given that uh, the internet, I look at it as almost like a utility. The industry never wants to look at it that way because it's a for-profit business, and it should be. But when you lose connectivity and you don't know why, we're going to be entering that next phase with AI that is so complex and the thought processes built into it become so opaque that if it does something and we don't know why, it's going to be a long day to figure out how to undo that. So it's so the way we build our infrastructure does change, and does need to change too. Is that we need to figure out how AI overlays into our network, and then to what extent can it control the underlay.
Interesting. Now, zooming in into Cisco, how does Cisco help CSPs deploy Gen AI capabilities?
That's a good question. I think let's see, the marketing department's going to want me to say, well, Cisco does it all. Cisco is capable of starting from the core, going all the way out to the customer premise, and deliver every bit along the way. The truth is that it takes a lot. It takes a full ecosystem, and with the marketing side, I'll agree with them. We can do it all. But the key components and the stuff that's really needing to be put in place today is, well, the infrastructure needs to evolve. Is that right now the telcos have they've always had, it's not a new thing for them, a legacy challenge. Is that when they make an investment and their investments are significant, they expect it to last many,
Yep.
many years
Yep.
to be able to get that through. And when you have a complex and distributed environment, and then you've also acquired other areas or other companies to expand your network's reach, you're going to have a multi-vendor environment with legacy equipment, each aging out at different times. So finding a way and a path forward for your equipment to supply you with the right foundation to deliver the right data and the right structure into the right systems is a huge challenge. But you're also trying to marry that and time that with the moment AI becomes functionally valuable as a business use case. So do you invest heavily now because you're trying to get ahead of the curve, or do you wait for that next use case that's all of a sudden showing extreme value for your competition or your peers, and then jump on board after they've refined it and the designs have been validated and so forth? But you back all that up, you have to begin looking at what part of the network you invested in and what do you want your business to be doing. Traditional telcos have been connectivity providers,
Yep.
and they've differentiated to the extent that there's different forms of connectivity and access. Like 25 years ago, I think it was T1, T3 lines, and they were just entering the DSL era, and then obviously cable internet era. And now we are way beyond that. We're talking about that type of service, but from fixed wireless access and fiber optic networks, and building those networks to all work as one is a constant challenge. And then if you're going to apply AI to that, you need to teach AI how to interpret the data and information that's streaming from it in order to service the, your customer base. And to get there, it's not just compute, not just your transport layer, and not just your routing layer, your switching layers. It's it all working in unison. And what's obviously left off the table, and I would say I do this on my own too, just because it's a very complicated aspect to put in, and it makes entering the command lines that much more complicated to get around, is security. Security is going to be of paramount concern when it comes to implementing AI, embracing AI, and having it as a functional use case. Now, it's always looked at as like a blocker in being able to progress and move quickly, but there's a new dynamic to security, and that is security is also your safety blanket to ensure that what you're doing with AI is not going to take that next step and undo everything else you've done previously. It's it's like the recess teacher at school. It'll be there to ensure that things stay on the rails, and then if they don't, it'll sequester it and help mitigate what it could be doing, and then put it back on track. And that is something that's uniquely Cisco, is that the portfolio we have and the level of integration security has with the network attached to our compute, which then is attached to the network, makes it extremely valuable. So like something we launched and announced about a month and a half ago is AI defense, for instance. Is that when you spin up an AI model and you begin training it,
Yep.
you begin thinking like, where is this data coming from? How is it going to be used? What is the context it's coming in from? And then how are we going to use that data to begin implementing Gen AI. Now, like obviously, not everyone understands how AI is done, so I won't talk in terms of model training, reinforcement learning, large scale, small scale, any of that. But for our purposes, it's AI has to have a way to make judgment calls. And that is going to be how we train the model, how we teach it. It's the kindergarten to first grade, whole progression of that if we're trying to put it in a personal touch to that. But then you go to inferencing. And then for our purposes, again, inferencing is the decision making. Is like, no, we're no longer teaching it. We're trying to ask it, from what you've learned, how do you make a decision here? And there is no proper metric to establish an AI model that's fully learned and hardened yet without protecting it from itself. So that a lot of people look at ChatGPT or they'll look at Grok 3 or any of the AI models that are out there right now and they think, wow, these things can do some amazing stuff. But they don't recognize is that they're not up to date. They are walled off from the world so that the information coming in is not the information they're necessarily acting upon. All that information coming in is still being reviewed, still being understood, still making sure that it's not going to destroy the purpose of the underlying model. And so that when we are building these models and when we are trying to implement them with AI defense, we're trying to establish some level of trust with the algorithms and rank that in a way that if it's coming in from the network, there should be a believability score, an impact score, a credential score to it. It's take what we've done with Kenna. We acquired a security company called Kenna. It does a risk assessment score, and you extend that to what the AI concepts are. Is that if you're capable of building an AI training model based on network inputs, which are vast. There's a lot of network out there. There are a lot of inputs out there. The network has a role to play. It's like the game of telephone. It has a role to play in making sure that data doesn't get garbled and the data where it comes from, its sources, its dimensions are fully understood and delivered in a structure in which the AI model can build.
Okay.
And putting all that together is difficult. And so doing so is it's something that we've been trying to simplify. We've got products like Hyperfabric AI. We've announced AI pods. We have partnerships with NVIDIA, and we have partnerships with storage partners like Vast, which is saying that the ecosystem has evolved so much that it's just not one player anymore, but we need to figure out a way to make it so that everything that's great across each of the players can be coalesced into a solid stack that can be stood up, deployed, and scaled. And we're not struggling with it. We're actually doing a pretty good job of executing it, if I say so myself, because there's not others in the industry that have the breadth of portfolio to do so yet. Not that they can't. It's just they don't have the portfolio for it. So we're in a good spot, I think, in that regard.
Wow, awesome. So you did mention about security, and you also mentioned about data reliability and trust, right? So these are some of the concerns that people often relate to when it comes to deploying Gen AI. So what are the challenges that you notice, in terms of the adoption, and how does Cisco help address these challenges?
That's a good question. You can approach it from a lot of angles too. I think in terms of let's just start with in terms of telecom. We can go more broad, but we focus on just what the telcos use of it right now and what their challenges they're facing is that like the distributed environments make it very challenging to trust all the data that's coming in. Not only is it that their again legacy systems and data structures are challenged, so they need the data science and engineering in order to build the models properly. But they have silos and fragmentations as a result of that too. Their vendor and infrastructure is across the gamut of is it 10 years old or is it brand new? In an ideal world, I would just say just go full greenfield. Just pretend like you're going to buy it all new and then start anew, and then ignore how much it's going to cost. But let's just figure that one out. It'll be a lot easier that way, and it would be a lot easier that way. So it's ushering them along to saying this is how we're going to build it and making sure step one foundation solid, step two foundation solid, and it's multiple steps in order before you really get into that Gen AI structure. But I think more importantly is that the technical issues and compounding that with the legacy systems is that you're going to get models that are really difficult to build. You have to one, it's the choice. Like we have a analysis paralysis and choice problem. Is that there is not a Google search how to build AI and this is the optimal result right now formula. Everyone is trying to figure out what is the recipe for success, what are the key ingredients I need, and how do I build value from it. And while we're all trying to figure that out, we as infrastructure vendors are trying to figure that out. Telcos as providers are trying to figure that out, and a lot of startups are trying to figure that out. And it's not necessarily a race because everyone's trying to perfect their own recipe for it without over rotating into so much that in 2 years and following the idea of Moore's law, that everything they've done is now obsolete. So they're always going to be, so instead of playing that 10-year investment cycle, we're having to change the conversation into maybe a 1 to 2 year investment cycle with a new business model and a new approach to it. Now, there's obviously we can go into regulatory and ethical challenges as well as just talent and employee challenges too. But
Yep.
fundamentally, it's going to start with understanding what's needed and how to implement it. And there is, I would love to because I search for it every day. There is no wrong path forward, and there is no right path forward. There's just a direction going forward, and we're all figuring out which one is the best.
Wow, amazing! I think it's a field where there's so much to learn, and I guess in this podcast we really uncovered some of the very important aspects of in the adoption of Gen AI, and what are the next steps that CSPs as well as enterprises should be looking at. So thank you so much, Dan, for joining us today and for sharing these insights.
Oh, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure to be here.
Okay, awesome. And to everyone tuning in, thank you for listening. If you guys want to learn more, visit www.cisco.com and do follow us for more insights and updates as we continue to uncover the latest in technology and telecommunications. See you in our next session. Bye-bye.